So, do a little bit of introduction about myself, my research. We'll talk about the soundscape and why I'm interested in the Burren and the Geopark area and what I intend to do. And we'll look at some questions after that. So, very briefly, Eugene McKeown is my name. I was born in Kilrush, actually, in County Clare. Lived my primary school days in Kilrush, and my brother and sisters are all living in Kilrush at this point. I spent my entire working life as an environmental engineer, now retired, mainly on noise and vibration type issues, environmental impact studies being a large portion of that. And I'm currently working as a PhD researcher at the University of Galway. Excuse me, sorry if I deafened anybody with that. And I do a bit on soundscape advocacy in terms of explaining to people what the soundscape is and why I think it's important. And that's, I suppose, part of the reason why I'm on the webinar this evening. I've done some events for Architecture at the Edge Festival in Galway last year at the Climate Change Festival. I developed I suppose, a show, for the want of a better word, on the sounds of climate change. And I've just completed a piece with Creative Ireland, Andreas the Stack, if some of you may know him, as a storyteller. And he has a story about a chap wandering through Galway, listening to the sounds of the city, which I think will be published in the next couple of months. It's at the final stages at the moment. My research, I'm looking at coastal soundscapes and the potential impact of offshore wind farms on the soundscape. So wind farms are going to be regulated by government policy, basically, on noise, and they're going to meet those target levels. And I'm kind of old enough to remember when that was the case with onshore wind farms, that turbines were small and the regulations were such that generally you wouldn't hear them. And it turned out as the turbines got bigger, people could hear them, and some of them were particularly had particularly difficulty with sounds. And it created difficulties for everybody in that context. So I suppose I've had um, a goal of highlighting the fact that even though offshore wind turbines will meet government guidelines, that doesn't mean that we'll never hear them. But it doesn't mean that they're going to be loud or deafening or anything like that. But it does mean that we will hear them on certain occasions and in specific weather conditions. And that's part of what my research is about. In relation to the soundscape of the Burren and Cliffs of Moher Geopark, um, looking at a couple of things. One is the background noise levels and what is the noise level there? Because obviously, if it's very noisy somewhere, you're not going to hear a low sound that can't overcome that. We're going to do some soundscape studies on the soundscape and identifying the features of the soundscape in the Burren, which again I'll talk about in a little while. And a kind of a personal project for me this year is to develop a topophilic map of the Burren and the Geopark. And I suppose through all of this, raise awareness of the soundscape in the area generally. Sorry, just move down another one. Yeah. So hearing versus listening. And hearing, I suppose, is a passive activity. It's involuntary. Even when we're asleep, we hear things. Um, it's just a physical act of detecting sound through the ears. Listening is different. You know, listening is an active process. We you know, we agree to do it. It's a voluntary process. We have to take part in it. It requires brain processing and concentration and an effort to understand and interpret the meaning of sound. And I think my wife is probably an expert on which I'm better at, but we'll leave that and move on. Hearing and perception. And again, I don't want to get too technical, but just to give you a little bit of background before we get into the soundscape, so you understand some of the technicalities of it. So humans can hear sounds down to a low sound. If you think kind of elephants rumbling or whales kind of talking in the ocean, they're low frequency sounds. And then high frequency sounds are things like bats that we don't hear because the frequency is too high, even though it can be, quite a loud sound, we don't hear it. And through evolution, our sensitivity is greatest in the middle, where human speech frequencies are. And how you perceive something or how you listen to something depends on the context. Are you a tourist in the area, or are you working, doing your job? The amount of attention you're giving something, memories of sound. If a particular sound can be associated with a particular event or a particular emotion. Music, for example, it's been shown that in our 20s and 30s, whatever music we listen to in that period and we like in that period kind of remains with us for the rest of our lives. And a song can kind of evoke memories of a particular event, 20, 30 years later, even if you just hear it out of the blue. Things like age and your hearing health, obviously, hearing deteriorates as you get older. Training, as an acoustician, I listen to things differently to other people. Some of my colleagues in the Galway Sound Lab in the university are trained and have worked in the music industry, and they have different sensitivities than I have, and perceive things differently to how I do. So the soundscape, sorry, just bear with me for one tick if I need to move myself out of my way here. Now, thanks, that's better. Um, so the soundscape is a mixture of different sounds that are heard in a particular place. Um, and while a picture, Bernie Krause, who's one of the founding fathers of soundscape studies, has said that while a picture may be worth 1,000 words, a soundscape is worth 1,000 pictures. And maybe I can show you why that might be. So in terms of measuring sound, we have a decibel scale. So people talk about decibels, and it can go below zero and it can go higher than 110. But if you think of it as kind of 0 to 100, like the speedometer in your car. Um, so me speaking to you, whoops, sorry, me speaking to you, we're in here at the 60, 70 decibel level, listening to the television at home, 60, 70 decibels. Uh, Countryside at night, quiet rural areas, your 30, 40 dB. Uh, Recording studios, bedroom at night are kind of lower levels again. And some of the quieter areas in the Burren would be kind of in the 20 decibel mark. And again, without getting too technical, there are two things we measure with sound. One is the decibels, which is the scale. So here's the hearing threshold. Anything below zero, we generally can't hear. Anything above 120 decibels is generally painful. Anything above 80 is where we start wearing earmuffs. So any of you that work in construction or even on a farm, there are times where you're advised to wear earmuffs, or even using lawnmowers or chainsaws, things like that. 80 decibels is kind of the recommended threshold there. And on this axis, then we have low frequency sounds here, and we have high frequency sounds here. So the bats are kind of off up here, and the whales are here. And then human speech is this little bit here. So quiet whispers would be down at this level, whereas shouting is kind of 60 to 80 decibels, depending on how loud you're shouting. And the frequency content is quite narrow. It's, 2000 to 5000 hertz, as we call it. So just to give you a flavor of what human speech sounds like, as if you didn't know, I just... Sorry, you might need to adjust your volume. Now, that, believe it or not, was recorded in the Burren. And what you had there were a couple of friends out for a stroll. And I was certainly the closest they got to me was 100 meters. Um, but, I could hear them from 500 meters away. You had distant traffic because it was just happened to be a busy period on the road. There's a car kind of off in the distance somewhere. And some of you may or may not have noticed two gunshots in that it was January. So obviously somebody was out doing a bit of hunting or that. So, these are normal sounds that would occur in any rural area at any point in time. And the burn is in that context. Um, so apart from decibels, the engineers can look at things like loudness and sharpness and roughness and pitch, and measure these with meters. Um, but sound can also be kind of quite a well, I suppose it's used as a marketing device. And just to give you an idea of how powerful noise is, or sounds, I mean, there are people whose job it is to design how the door on a Ford car or how the door on a Hyundai sounds when you close it, or how the engine sounds, both to the people inside the car and outside the car. There are people who work for Guinness and the large beer companies and um, the various drinks companies that their job is to design how the snap when you pull the little tab on a tin, that it sounds like an expensive drink rather than something that's cheap and cheerful. Vacuum cleaners, you don't want a noisy vacuum cleaner, but if you had a silent vacuum cleaner, you would question, is it actually picking up any dirt or not? So, and alarms, supermarkets, restaurants, the music is there to get us to stay in the supermarket for as long as possible. In a restaurant, they might want to turn over the seats, so they kind of have fast playing music that encourages you to kind of move on and let somebody else in, or nice slow music that encourages to stay there for the evening and have a few drinks, maybe, whatever. And again, just to give you an idea of the power of sound, I'm going to play two short sounds. Now, they're both two notes, right? So it's very, very short, but just can you kind of, what do these sounds kind of evoke for you? So that's all you're getting at that one. So, did anybody kind of picture themselves about to watch Jaws on Netflix by any chance? And that's, oops, sorry, we've enough of that. So, moving on quickly to the soundscape. So, Murray Schafer um, was the author of the soundscape, the tuning of the world. And he, as one of the founding fathers, broke sounds down into three kind of general categories. There's geophony, which are the sounds made by the earth, so thunder, volcanoes, rivers, those type of sounds that if there was nothing alive in an area, those sounds would exist. Then there's biophony, which is made by living creatures, the animals, the birds. And then there's anthrophony, which are man-made sounds. And I suppose the soundscape is kind of has evolved in terms of treating anthrophony as kind of man-made noise since the Industrial Revolution, whereas man-made noise has been going on for quite a long time, as we'll see in a few minutes. But a natural soundscape, which is what a lot of people kind of regard as a pure soundscape, if you like, is generally dominated by biophony and geophony. In terms of the ecological role of sound, why do animals make sound? They make sounds for communication. So, for example, there's mating calls, and anybody who has an interest in birds will know there's a mating call, and then there's a social call. Robins, for example, sing all winter because they're defending a territory for breeding purposes in the spring. Flocks of birds or herds of animals, the cattle in the fields are calling to each other to kind of coordinate where they are and you know, where the best grass is or whatever they may need to communicate to one another. Bats use sound for echolocation, as we know. Birds can use sound as landmarks, where they fly along the coast because they're migrating at night, so they can't see. Obviously lights have an influence, but the sound marks can be used for navigation purposes as well. And then you have things like listening for prey or listening for predators, depending on which side of the menu you're on. In terms of humans, we have both psychological and physiological benefits. For example, lower sound levels have been shown to reduce stress, lower heart rate, decrease cortisol, improve mood and cognitive function. Sounds can give us a sense of place, in terms of characteristic sounds, and experiencing wilderness. The sound of wind and water is kind of regarded as a kind of a pleasant natural sound. And there's also the concept of tranquility, which again we'll talk about. But you had the monks in the early Christian period, and even modern day, practice tranquility, which can be confused with silence, but it's not quite silence. But tranquility is found in indigenous transitions. And modern day practices such as mindfulness include tranquility. So moving back into the technical side again, the soundscape is defined in an international standard by the International Standards Organization, ISO. The standard happens to be number 12913. International standards are there for a lot of things. So, for example, what does a USB-C connector look like? And what's the difference between a USB-A and a USB-C connector? That's all set out in international standards, so that if somebody in Japan is making a USB connector, and somebody in Ireland is making one, they're going to be the same, and they'll be able to fit into the sockets that they're meant to fit into. It's the same with a soundscape, in that if I'm measuring a soundscape and somebody in the UK is measuring a soundscape, or America is measuring a soundscape, that we get the same answer, basically, in terms of what the soundscape would be categorized as. But the standard defines the soundscape as the acoustic environment as perceived or experienced and or understood by a person or people in context. Now, there's nothing there about noise meters or any kind of electronic instruments to measure what the soundscape is. The soundscape is what's perceived, experienced, or understood by a person or people. So the only way you can measure the soundscape is with other people, and large numbers of other people, obviously, to try and make it statistically relevant. And I suppose that's part of my purpose of speaking to you this evening. So again, in the standard, there are things called soundscape attributes, and this is how the standard kind of breaks down sounds. So we've had the Murray Schafer's three categories. In the soundscape standard, we break them down into 8 categories. So we talk about sounds that are pleasant or annoying, and on the other kind of spectrum, if you like, we talk about sounds that are eventful or uneventful. So if we were to take, let's say, Shop Street in Galway, where there's half a dozen buskers, there's tourists chattering, and there's a protest going on, and lots of different activities going on. So it's quite eventful. So if you regard that as pleasant and it's eventful, that might be described as a vibrant soundscape. Whereas if it's, a violent protest and they happen to be emptying the bins at the time you're trying to assess the soundscape, it might be eventful, but it might be annoying, in which case it is categorized as chaotic. Similarly, if it's pleasant and uneventful, so for example, if you're sitting in a forest or sitting by the beach and there's not a lot happening, it's uneventful. Uneventful, and let's say it's pleasant, so that might be described as calm. Whereas if you're somewhere and there's a fan running or a piece of equipment running that's just running continuously, so it's uneventful, but it's annoying you, that might be described as monotonous. So these are the categories that I'll be asking people to categorize what they're hearing or listening to in the geopark area when we're doing the evaluations. So the soundscape changes over time. So if we just take the Burren, for example, at one stage the Burren was covered in ice. So which you wouldn't have been, but if you happened to be there, it would be like in Greenland or Iceland even. And I sometimes get confused between the two, which seems to be fashionable these days. But you listen to the sound of glaciers grinding on the rock and the sound of very large volumes of water rushing to the sea. Um, the ice disappears, you're into prehistory, you know, humans start to inhabit the area. We had an axe factory at Fanor and Doolin along the coast, and you know we would have had forest clearing, so trees were being chopped down with axes. Whereas nowadays, if forestry is being cleared, it's by mechanical means. The medieval period, agriculture was all done by large groups of people and all done by horses or animals. Um, you know, we had the odd battle in the area, so these were the sounds that you'd have heard at the time. You don't hear the sound of somebody in a suit of armor trying to ride on a rough road or gallop on a horse, which you know you can imagine what that might have sounded like. The early modern period, you know, we get into uh, kind of activities change. The 20th century, 1901 would have been the first motor cars in the Burren. There was a grand tour of Ireland organised in 1901, and the cars came to Dublin, Cork, up to Limerick, and from Limerick to Ennis, Ardrahan, Gort, and into Galway, and up through Connemara, up to Donegal. There were 30 cars, and apparently there were crowds along the way because nobody had seen a car. So I'm sure, you know, Gort and Ardrahan in those days, and that was 1901, 125 years ago. Aircrafts, you know, we had it's only in the last 100 years, but 1930s were the first flying boats into Foynes, and 1960s we had jets going in now to Shannon. Farm machinery, you know, we now have quads, for example, to traverse the land, and coolers, for example, for milk, you know, are relatively new arrivals. So that's kind of over thousands of years, but over 1 year, you also have changes. And Murray Schaefer did some analysis in northwestern Canada. Now it's a lot colder up there. So, for example, birds, which would be this heavy line here. So January, February, March, you know, very little bird activity because they'd all migrated south, and then over the summer they're all there and they're busy, and then it kind of fades off at the end of the year again. Bees, you know, don't start until April, May, and then they're peaked during the summer, and then they're gone again by August or September. Now it's slightly different in Ireland in that we have a longer growing season, and you know you can have bees active much earlier in the year and later in the year. Birds, we'll see in a minute, is significantly different. So the burn in winter. This is a recording made in January at one of the Turlocks. So depending on whether, you know, it was certainly eventful, and whether that was pleasant or annoying, it was either chaotic or vibrant. And but that's, you know, it's not for me to tell you which it was. Some of you might have found that monotonous, but these are the joys of people having their own perception and putting their own perception on things. Sorry. So tranquility versus silence. I suppose the starting point is there's no such thing as silence. There's always some kind of sound. So even rooms that are designed to be absolutely quiet, which are called anechoic chambers. So the noise level in here might be, 10 dB, might be 0 dB. I was in one that was designed to be less than 10. They're very, very disconcerting. It's unusual for one person to be allowed in there on their own. There's usually two people because you can get completely disoriented. Um, the you start to hear things that you wouldn't normally hear. For example, the blood flowing through your body, your heartbeat becomes audible, and it can be very fearful as well. In terms of all these sounds and where they're coming from. Tranquility is kind of something like this. Is what we would normally associate with a tranquil space. But it's surprising, in busy city areas, there can be quiet spaces where somebody kind of tunes out and they're in a tranquil space in a very noisy spot or a very busy spot. So again, it's kind of the perception, how you feel, how each individual feels about their soundscape is how it's evaluated. So why are we looking at the geopark? So the geopark to me is very, very interesting from an acoustic point of view. First of all, it's on the coast, and we're talking about offshore wind farms. Now, there's no proposal at the moment to build an offshore wind farm anywhere along the Clare coast, but presumably in time it's going to happen. But the area is a UNESCO geopark. Now, because it's UNESCO designated, means that it's up there with a limited number of sites in the entire world. It's internationally recognized. It's not just something that I've recognized or Clare County Council have designated. UNESCO are a world body. It's also a national park, or the section of it that's designated as a national park. It has a special designation, but there's no, I suppose, special protection for a UNESCO park or a national park under Irish planning legislation at the moment. There's kind of reference to guidelines, and they're kind of vague, and I suppose is one of the reasons why I'm trying to highlight the soundscape is to get people to think about things before we make decisions that then become irreversible, and we kind of wonder why we did that. The other thing about the geopark area is there's a long history of human occupation. It's back to the Stone Age. There's it's today it's a living, working environment. So it's not something that's protected in cotton wool. But it is something that is unique, and the heritage of the area is cherished and valued and recognized both internationally and nationally. And we also have, because of its uniqueness, we have a significant tourism footfall, and that has an impact in terms of the soundscape as well. So the background noise levels in the Burren, this was last summer. So again, going back to our little scale, we're looking at 60, 70 decibels as I'm speaking to you. Quiet areas are kind of in here. But this was a quiet evening in the Burren, and the noise levels were kind of in and around 20 decibels, and this is what it sounded like. And again, just to maybe point out that while we had the cuckoo and various little birds in the bushes there. We also had cattle in the background, for those of you that may have noticed that. So, um, another thing about the Burren is geographical location. The busiest transatlantic flight path is between London and New York. And because we live on a globe, when you draw a map of the world, this is what it generally looks like on a flat sheet of paper. But if you draw the shortest distance between London and New York on a flat sheet of paper, it actually is a curve, and that's the curve. And if you zoom in Ireland, you'll see that the line comes through North Clare. Now, what that means is that we get a lot of jets coming through. Depending on where the jet stream is, they might be north of this line or south of it. And air traffic control can have another influence on that because they've obviously got to keep them apart. Um, this is another piece of bird song recorded in the Burren, but it's different to what you heard a minute ago. Whoops. I'll get this right eventually. Oops. There we go. So, somebody listening to that versus listening to the cuckoo might have a completely different perception of what the soundscape is like. And these are the differences that we want to try and evaluate in terms of people's perceptions of the Burren. So, topophilic maps, something I mentioned earlier, and topophilia is basically a word invented by W.H. Auden in the introduction to John Betjeman's poetry in 1947. And topo is a place, and philia is fondness or love for a place. And Betjeman himself has a connection with the Burren in that in his poem Ireland with Emily in 1943. He described the Burren as stony seaboard, far and foreign, stony hills poured over space, stony outcrop of the Burren, stones in every fertile place, which is a nice, or to me anyway, it's a nice description. And again, I suppose we're into perception. Some of you might not particularly like Betjeman. Another literary connection with the Burren is obviously Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, and there's kind of anecdotal stories there about how the karst landscape inspired the description of the desolation of Mordor, and some of the sounds of the wind going over the pavements, has kind of connotations. Tim Robinson, in his book and maps, made reference to the wind in the Burren and several passages. So these are the kind of things that evoke a sense of the place, and these are the things that I want to try and identify over the year. So this is on the right is what a topophilic map might look like. These are the waterways in Galway City. The river runs down on the right hand side, and the Eglinton Canal is the kind of arch to the left. Excuse me. And basically, there's little green. Whoops. There's little green and apologies. There's little green and blue dots identifying various sounds, and I did I suppose a description of the sounds, and as you walk up along river. There's various stations where you can listen to different sounds on it. So the idea would be to identify things like that in the Burren and Geopark area. So um, sound marks. It's a term that's derived from landmark. So it's that, but it's a sound, and it's what makes the geopark unique. You know, there are certain sounds that are going to be there, um, and I suppose it's to identify the sounds and where they are, and look at, you know, is it something that's related to a time of the year? For example, the sound of the water fowl on the Turlough, or the sound of the cuckoo during the summer. Is it related to weather conditions? And should those sounds be conserved, you know, in some way? But certainly, I think they should be recorded and highlighted for people. So sound walks is the way that I'm planning to carry out the research for the most part. And the sound walk takes about an hour. 50% of that time is involved with the survey part, in that it usually involves moving to maybe 3 different locations on foot. So there's a kilometre and a half to walk. And at each location, you listen for 3 minutes and then fill in a 2-page form, which is basically a box ticking exercise. It's the form is designed so that you just tick in a box and giving your view, you know, rating something from 1 to 5, for example. Um, and Basically, what I'm going to be doing is over the summer, in fact, from early February, scheduling events, and I'm going to put them up on Eventbrite and try and publicise them through Burn Bio and other organisations, and get a few posters up. So basically, point people to Eventbrite so that they can see when the next one is on and if they'd like to take part. Now, because the research is controlled under university policy, GDPR is to ensure that I don't end up selling your email addresses to anybody, or uh, doing anything that might cause difficulties for people who take part in the research. There's a consent form, which basically uh, you're giving permission for us to collect the information and to process that information, and use that information for our research purposes. Now, it is confidential, so you're not identified with any of the responses. And there's no sensitive questions, or at least I don't think there is. You know, there's a question about, are you living locally, or are you a foreign visitor from a foreign country? You know, it's not meant to be intrusive. It's information gathering, but there is a requirement for consent form. So the plan would be, if you sign up on Eventbrite, the price of admission is I send you a copy of the form that you can read at your own leisure. And then when you come on the day, we'll ask you to sign a copy of the form and then fill out the survey form as we walk through it. It's weather dependent. The kind of equipment doesn't take well to high winds, and rain also causes issues. So again, we might need your email, or we will need your email to make sure that the event is actually going to take place, because obviously weather is a significant element of it. But the plan is that, you know, 50% of the time will be chatting about various things, rather than getting too technical, or causing too much stress for people. So that's more or less it from my end. Um, so the first soundwalk will take place on the 8th of February at 11, from Gartlecca crossroads, and we're going to follow the blue route over as far as the Turlough. So it's about a kilometre and a half of a walk with 3 stations. So there'll be maybe a 10-minute introduction, then it'll take 30 minutes to do the 3 stations by the time we kind of walk the from one to the other. And then we have a chat for as long as people want to have a chat. In order to, I suppose, manage it, we'll limit the places to 10 places on each walk. So the QR code links you to Eventbrite, and allows you to sign up and get a little bit more information. And as I say, it'll ask you for your email so that I can send on the consent form. So that's more or less it from my end. And I'm not sure where we are in terms of queries or questions, or has everybody gone to sleep at this point?
Yeah, if folks, if you have any questions, you can throw them into the chat there. One thing that I was curious about, Eugene, maybe it's a silly question, I don't know, but like, does the limestone itself in the burn shape the sound? Like, it obviously does, but when you're recording it, how might limestone pavement kind of affect what you're picking up?
Uh, that's actually a very interesting question, in that you have the clints and the grikes. And I've actually recorded the sound of a gate on the high burn, where the wind is kind of whistling through the gate, making what's known as aeolian noise, where the wind passes over an opening. It's like blowing over the top of a bottle. And
Hmm.
Tim Robinson has made reference to this sound and others in relation to the wind and the burn, and how, as the wind passes over the open pavement. Now, I think it will depend on the wind direction, because obviously, if it's running with the clints, it'll have one effect, but if it's running at right angles to them, it'll have another effect. So that's actually one of the things that I want to try and investigate, as to what those sounds sound like, and is there a difference between the uplands and the lowlands? um, a very interesting question, and thank you for that.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so just few comments really more than anything, just
Mhm.
some people interested and would like to participate. So you can scan the QR code there and it will take you to Eugene's Eventbrite page, and the Soundwalk information will be there, and Eugene's email address is there as well. Um, one more thing that I'm curious about, Eugene, like when you're recording something, do you have what would inform like where and when you would place the microphone or the gear? Is it, do you just do it randomly, or is there kind of more thought
Well,
behind it?
I suppose in terms of Sunday the 8th of February, I've been out there, well, it's a couple of weeks ago now, um, to try and identify, three slightly different areas. Like, obviously, if you were to put people on a bus and kind of travel around the entire Burren, you could do vastly different soundscapes. But if you think of Gortleck Crossroads, the crossroads itself, there are people kind of coming and going, and they're parking cars and chit chatting and organizing themselves to go whichever direction they're going to go in. So it's quite a busy area, and there's a lot of kind of human interaction there. If you then move towards the Turlough, there's a scrub, a hazel scrub area, where you tend to have interesting bird calls, and you obviously the road is there, so there's cars passing on the road, if you, because we'll be walking along the road, um, and we'll pull into one of the gates along the way, but you're far enough away from the car parking not to hear it, or at least it's so distant that it's not part of the soundscape there, and you have birdsong there. Now, again, you might or might not have a jet passing over at the time, which is a different perception. You might have a car. Sorry, excuse me. You might have a car on the road, which obviously is going to influence people's perception of that particular evaluation. And then as you get towards the Turlough, you're into open pavement, and the sounds are coming from quite a distance, because it's open territory. So in a 1.5 kilometer space, you've got three, what I would regard as different environments, um, at Gortleca. So the question is then, do you go to the uplands and find three kind of similar sites, maybe the top of a hill and down one side of the hill, um, as a location, or if you take the Cliffs of Moher, for example, if you're near the visitor centre, it's going to be quite busy with traffic and people coming and going and hustle and bustle. Whereas if you move a couple of 100 meters in either direction, you've kind of moved out of that, and you have a different environment. So it's I suppose a question of trying to select locations that are, representative of what people might experience over the large area. It's not going to be possible to cover everything, but to
Yeah.
try and cover as much of the trafficked areas as we can,
Yeah.
and go to some remote areas. So there will probably be some sound walks in quite remote sections of the Burren. But again, it would be a function of how many people are likely to take, the really difficult trails. So I could be sitting there for a day to wait for a number of people to come by, and hopefully they'll agree to spend 3 minutes with me and fill out a form.
Okay. Yeah, I think we'll leave it at that. So thanks a million, Eugene, for all of that. And again, uh, follow the QR code if you want to partake in any of the sound walks. And hopefully I myself will be able to see you at one of them. Eugene,
Oh, great.
we'll be sending out members, events, information for February tomorrow, I'd say, with members walks and next month's webinar as well. So keep an eye out for that. So have a good night, everyone, and
Well,
thanks again, Eugene.
sorry, Brian, just before we
Yeah,
go, I think it's been quite short. Partly, I think, because I'm only starting. So, with your permission, we might do one maybe at the end of the year, or this time next year, when we have lots of interesting recordings from the
well, when we
Burren
have all the
today,
data, yeah, it would be great. Yeah,
But I will be sharing some of it, and I'll keep in touch with Burn Bio, so that if there are interesting stuff, or some interesting stuff there, and I can make it available in the interim, I'll certainly be uh, making it. Making Burn Bio Trust available, aware of it, so that if anybody has an interest, they can pick it up.
lovely stuff. All right, have a good night,
Okay.
everyone. Thanks again, Eugene.
Thanks very much.
Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone.